This is a 15-minute information-dense video on how do you design backend APIs as a senior developer. Now, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and also leave a comment below if you like this video. That helps the channel grow. Now, right at it, what we have is a backend system, right? So I will not go into specific frameworks or languages or constructs like GraphQL or, Express.js or any of this. We will not talk about this because I understand every single backend is different. Your tech stack might be different. Your technology might be different. But I'm going to show you how a request is supposed to flow in your backend, right? So see, we have talked a lot about how do you build or how does WAF work or how do you build like backends as a whole as a senior developer, but this is specifically about APIs. See, there are multiple ways to go about designing an API. If it's a private API, it doesn't really matter how you're doing it, right? So there is a concept of REST API, which follows a lot of these standards like 200 OK, 404 not found, 500 internal server error and so on. I am not a huge fan of this. Let's put it on record. Let's be honest about this. I, as a developer, am not a huge fan of REST because it's very easy to lie in REST. It's easy to say that something was 200 OK, but it was not really. It is easy to say 404 not found, but maybe you do have a resource. It's easy to say 500 internal server error, even on an error which is supposedly handled by the server in the first place. So I don't recommend using REST for your private APIs. For your public APIs, sure, because that is how most LLMs and clients understand. But if you want to have a robust private API, you can also go proprietary. When I say proprietary, I mean just designing the whole API from scratch in the first place. Now, to give you an example, to give you an opinionated example in this, let's say your endpoint is just API, example.com/API, right? And every API works on a single endpoint, right? So either that, so all of this is post request because you also want to send data, or you can have like a scoped access. So API 1, then you have /API/API 2 and so on. This is something that might sound again nice on paper that, hey, you have different routes and different stuff, but I still don't recommend this. And the reason for this is because there is no possibility of batching in this, right? If you just have a single API endpoint, what you unlock is not only just a single API call, but in a lot of environments like front-end web development and in backend, it's also possible to batch certain API calls because user might do it very quickly. Like if user is loading a single page and you want 3 API calls being made to the server, instead of sending 3 separate calls, you can batch them together at a 50 millisecond interval, combine them and send them, right? So this format, this is the one that allows you to batch where there is no API name inside the URL itself. So that is why I would recommend to start with this. First of all, make it post because you don't know when you want to send the data. Get request gets a lot of messy as you scale up. Now, once your request is there, once your request has been sent to the backend, the very first thing is obviously the load balancer and WAF, which I'll skip because we have discussed this in past and this is also not the topic of the video. So you just configure this somehow and then it finally reaches your API server or whatever, your VM, your Lambda, whatever it is that you're running. Now, with your API server in place, the very first thing it should be doing, if it's not being already done by your WAF or rate limiter or load balancer, is the rate limiting. And your rate limiting must be done in a special way. Ideally, what you should be doing is you should have an algorithm which checks if unauthorized, that means the user is not logged in, then you must rate limit on IP. And your application, again, depending on the kind of application that you have, you should try to authorize people for sensitive actions, right? Which are supposedly high rate limits. Because IP addresses are tricky. They are shared. There is NAT traversal. So you will have one IP which spawns to like hundreds or even thousands of potential users. Especially true for colleges, universities, for office-based people who are, behind a single network. So rate limiting on IP is not really a good solution, but you don't have any other option if you don't know who the user is in the first place. If the user is authorized, on the other hand, if authorized, then you should rate limit on the account ID, right? Whatever ID they are signed in with, you should use that as one of the components in constructing the key of the rate limiter key. This should also consist of the API name, right? API name that the user is trying to access. Because see, you don't want to rate limit the user completely from a backend if they have mistakenly done some refreshes on some specific page, right? So this is where, this post request that we are making, the body of this post request contains a lot of information. One of the parameters should be API name, get user data, let's say something like that. You construct this rate limit key and you ask whatever. You ask your unlogged database table or you ask whatever your Redis, whatever your solution is for rate limiting, you ask that, then you move forward. the next thing, the most important thing that you do after this point, after you have validated, that the rate limit is fine, is that you validate the data. Validate the data strictly. And I think it can also happen before rate limiting, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, I think it's supposed to happen a little bit before rate limiting, because you also need to get the API name out of the body, right, in the first place. So this might also be a field which is there in the payload of your body, which is getting requested. So I would assume that validate the data strictly is probably going to be before rate limiting. Let's just remove this connection. Let's just move this whole thing a little ahead. All right. So over here, before you actually do the rate limiting stuff, you actually need to validate your data, validate the post body. It is so critically important that you get this right, that I would say like most of the vulnerabilities that happen always are happening because of this missing step, or this step being weak, not even like missing. So how do you validate the post body in the first place? Well, this goes back to how do you create your API in the first place. What I would say is that you should create an API structure which looks like this. Let's say you have an API folder, whatever, in your backend, and then you have get user data as one of the APIs. Then you have, let's say, start login as second API, and you have like registered user as third API, and so on. Every single one of these APIs that you're creating is independently stored as separate files, right? As separate folders rather. And each one of them is supposedly having two files at least. The first one is some sort of handler, which is the actual code that gets executed. And the second one is some sort of constants or metadata file, right? Which includes all the information about how the function is supposed to behave in terms of rate limiting, in terms of validation, and so on and so forth. So that is what actually you would also use. So this rate limiting that I'm talking about, the limits, like how many requests per minute are allowed, you can define this on a per API level, per API basis inside this specific file, that you say that, okay, I want only 60 requests per minute maximum, or I want like 600 requests per minute. So that will go inside this constants file, right? And the handler is supposed to just execute the code in the first place. So another thing that goes inside constants is the schema of the accepting post body, right? So let's say you have the start login as one of the options, as one of the APIs, right? So over here, you can have like input schema as one of the things that what you're expecting the user to pass in the first place. And if you're using something like TypeScript, I would recommend Zod as a library. Extremely good, extremely cool library. So over here, you would define that the input schema is that you have to pass the email like this, and you have to pass the password like this. What this does is, imagine for some reason that you don't have this and you're just doing JSON parse from body, and you, let's say, have MongoDB as a database. Then somebody can just pass, a database, a NoSQL injection sort of, where, somebody just passes this syntax, which is like a typical NoSQL injection, which is possible. If you have Zod schema, it's basically just not possible to pass something like this as long as the schema is fine. And I would go like one more step ahead, and I will say like you can even define like a password schema itself, which is like strict version of z.string, where you can have like min of 4, max of 100 or 50, whatever you have, and then you have like some regex or something that validates if the password is strong enough or not. So this is absolutely necessary to be done on an every single API level that you're creating. Do not skip this step. This would be a make or break step for you in your API, for your backend to be potentially getting hacked one day. So once you have this done, obviously this constants.ts file will also have something like rate limit as a construct, let's say 60 per minute. Somehow you're able to define this. So it depends on what sort of backend you have. But you have all these information, all these metadata in a separate file, right? Now again, this is framework agnostic. This could be Rust, this could be Go, this could be anything. Could be like TypeScript for all I care. But what matters here is that you have to have this construct. You have to have this flow of, API endpoints and stuff available. Then once your request post body is validated, you go ahead and check the rate limits, if the rate limits are right or not, and if they are right, you just decide to move forward with all this stuff. As you move forward, you actually execute the handler code. Now over here, again, I would recommend that every single handler code is supposed to start with the authentication, right? So you have to authorize if the user is supposed to access that specific code or not. So every single handler that we have over here, this handler file, which you have inside here, if I can give you an example of something like this, every single file should start with something like require admin, or, await require user, or whatever your roles are, right? So these functions can be pre-made, these can be pre-constructed depending on what you are, and make it a habit that every single handler is supposed to have something as a first line of code, require XYZ. And this function should be very well tested, should be very well tested that it handles all the edge cases, it's extracting out the token. So in this specific case, like I mentioned over here, your header can have, X access token or something, which is like a validation token, or it can also have a cookie, which is like HTTP only cookie. If you have a local storage access token, you can pass it like this. This access token or this validation is what you are supposed to read when you are doing this stuff, right? When you're doing the handler execution and when you are extracting out the admin. Now you might say that, hey Mehul, this is fine, but you asked us to construct a rate limiting key based on the account ID. So if we don't do the authentication before this, then how are we supposed to have the account ID in the rate limiting key before we actually do the authentication? And that is an extremely good question. And what I would suggest you for this is that your X access token itself should be ideally a JWT signed token, right? So once it's a signed token instead of just an arbitrary string, you don't have to do a database lookup for verifying if the user is legit or not. If your access token itself is JWT signed, let's say your signed token is just, just the user ID. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nothing special. So if you sign this token, you create a JWT out of it. What you can do is, even without performing a database call, you can take out the authorized actual legit account ID, and nobody can even fake it, right? Because you are not just checking base 64 encoding, you're actually verifying if the JWT is valid or not. So you get the account ID for rate limited part, and when you actually need the user, or you actually need the user, instructor, admin, whatever, you do the actual decoding of the JWT, call the database, verify the session expiry, all of that. Beyond this, you actually do the further code execution. And very, very fundamentally speaking, that's all you need. That is all you need to build a extremely high, robust, high scalable, high traffic API that knows its own functions. It knows what the rate limiting is, what the code is to execute is, has a very strictly defined input schema. And I would say, like, go ahead and also make an output schema if you want. This is strictly for type safety, right? So output schema is something that your backend will return. It's strictly for type safety. It's not for enforcing anything, because your backend is supposed to be trusted code, right? So it's not going to send anything which the client is not expected. But if you just return like status as, something like okay or whatever, you can actually use the schema and copy the types on front end by some type generator, use them to create like fully typed end-to-end API systems. And I'm not even talking about using some library or something. This could be literally something that you do within your company, and it's not more than maybe a few days of time. And I mean, even a day's time these days, if you know what you're doing with these Cloud Code setups and these AI systems. So this is an extremely robust, extremely cool way of building APIs, and this is how you should build APIs moving forward. There are a lot of interesting paths which happened here inside, once the API has been built, and here as well on the load balancer WAF side, which I'll be happy to discuss. But I want you to leave a comment on what do you like in this video and what would you want to see next. I would want you to hype this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, so that I can create a lot more interesting content like this continuously. That's all for this one, and I will see you in the next video very soon.